Hi students, a very good evening to one and all. I hope you are all doing well, and I also hope that you have gone through my previous lecture which I posted last night. No, in continuation of that lecture, today I want to deal with some other concepts that Jakobson uh, is analyzing regarding the poetic function, and of course how he tries to bring in the different features of poetic language, and then he explains that all these features can be analyzed under the branch of linguistics. That's what he feels. So, in the previous lectures, we have seen a brief introduction to the linguist, that is Jakobson, and also we have seen how he tries to impress upon us that poetics can be very easily made a part of linguistics. And then he explains what are the six functions of language, or sorry, the six constitutive factors of a speech event. And he then goes on to explain that all these six factors correspond to the six functions of language. That's what we have seen yesterday, and I've given you on the Word document also what are the six factors on one side and the six functions on the other side. Okay. Now, after analyzing the functions briefly, all the functions like emotive function, cognitive function, and what you say, fatigue, then what is emotive or referential, okay, then metalingual, etc. Lastly, he comes to poetic function of the language, and then he says that poetic function is not confined to poetry alone. This is a very significant aspect of this essay that we should know. Usually, we believe that a poetic function of the language may exist only in poetry. But Jakobson is trying to present that it is not the thing. He is trying to present that poetic function of language can be sought or can be seen outside poetry also. That is what he established. And then further, he is trying to put a question. So, of course, he in yesterday's lecture we have seen how he is convincingly arguing that poetic function is not only for poetry but also outside poetry. This is because he actually tried to say that verbal structures, whether they are used in poetry or in general language or everyday language or other purposes of language, are always goal oriented. So no verbal structure will be without any goal. That is what he actually explained, the nature of language or the nature of verbal structure. And from there he derived that if it is so the poetic function, being one of the functions of language in general, can be seen outside poetry also. And he gives us some examples wherein, without knowing that this is a poetic function, we will be dealing with the poetic function. Now, in our use of the phrase like John Margery and horrible Harry, all these varieties, he says that without knowing, we are into the some poetic techniques. So that is what he stated. And of course, after analyzing that, he tries to put a question. Okay, of course, we have seen that poetic function is a general function of language which is outside poetry, and of course in poetry it is more than outside in poetry. So then how to examine this, how to bring out the empirical evidence for this poetic function in a language. That is what he says, and that is why see, today I'm not sharing my screen because I will be referring to the text here and there, because we will find all technical examples that are given by Jacobson, example after example, which you may get confused. So I am trying to give you only the gist of whatever the rest of the essay that Jacobson has written. So firstly, what is his aim? His aim is to now explain how can we study empirically the linguistic criteria or criterions that are involved in poetic function. That is what he says. And then firstly, he says that poetry uses a kind of selection and combination. The poets, while writing, of course, select words. I also told you that the romantic definition of poetry goes on like this: as spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings or emotions, etc. Of course, it is not always spontaneous. It can be very well revised, okay, modified again and again. So that is why we have many manuscripts which were modified again and again in London Museum. So here he says that poetry uses the principle of selection and combination. So what is this selection? Say for example, here he gives one example, taking the, let me read out from the text. So how this selection and combination works in the poetic function. Okay, so here he says that, say for example, if the child is the topic of the message, if at all a poet, or of course a poet only for us, because we are talking about poetic message, and here I feel poetic language can be considered as the language of what do you say, prose also, even because even in prose we have poetical elements like figures of speech and all other will be used even in dramas. Okay, so here he is giving one example. If child is the topic of the message, for example, the poet is going to produce a poem regarding child. The speaker selects one among the extant, more or less similar nouns like child, kid, youngster, tot. So all of them equivalent in a certain respect. So these are synonyms in other words. So the process of selection occurs based on the principle of either synonymity or antonymity. You know what are synonyms and antonyms. So if the topic for the message is child, there is every possibility that the poet or the writer will select a word. This is with this selection. So how the selection is done? For that, Jacobson says that the selection will be based upon equivalence. So equivalence of the concept. See, child, tot, kid, youngster, they are all synonymous. They are all equal in certain respect. And then he may select one of the semantically cognate verbs. So after the noun, the verb comes, and he may take one of the verbs like sleeps, dozes, nods, naps, etc. So these are also synonymous. And then what? He selects and then combines. So Jakobson says that the selection is produced on the basis of equivalence, similarity and dissimilarity, synonymity and antonymity, while the other part, that is combination, that is the build-up of the sequence, is based on the contiguity. So what is contiguity? Parasparata. So that means contiguity is touching or adjoining, near, next to, in space or time, adding. Okay, contiguity. So this is how he says that in poetry there is a process called, which Jakobson names as selection and combination. So how are these verbs or syllables are being selected and combined? This is, according to Jakobson, is a matter of study for linguistics. So this is what he says. And so there is the empirical study. There is an empirical scope. There is a scope for empirical study of linguistic factors in the processes that are being used for poetic language. So this is one thing that he gives. Okay. Now, secondly, what he says, there is a kind of syllable gradation. Syllable gradation that may take place in a certain order, and this always characterizes the poetic language. Syllable gradation, we, for example, previously he mentioned the utterances of Horrible Harry or John and Margery, etc. So syllable, John, Margery, how many syllables? So like that gradation. So maybe the gradation, maybe beginning with simple, one syllable, two syllable, three syllables, four, like that. So grading one after the other. And also sometimes syllables, words of two syllables are used in a line, or three syllables are used in a line. And here Jakobson gives us the famous example of Greek, wherein Caesar, he says veni, vidi, vici. So that is in Greece, wherein Shakespeare uses I came, I saw, I conquered. So this is how a kind of syllable gradation, so to acquire or so to bring the poetic quality into the language of poetry, is always considered by poets. And Jakobson says that this process of syllable gradation is very much a concept in linguistics, and it can be studied. Empiricism, this is how he is trying to bring empiricism into the analysis of poetry or poetic language. Okay, so this is how he says. Secondly, the second feature which we can, of course, study empirically. And then thirdly, he says that poetic language uses measure of sequences, which is nothing but meter. We all know how now, because we have been reading poetry. You have been reading for reading poetry, maybe since your high school times, or even before that, but without knowing that there is meter, or there is syllable gradation, or something like selection and combination, etc. But here Jakobson says that the message of the measure of sequences that are used in poetry, which is nothing but meter, uh, is particular only to poetry. It is not used outside poetry. And you know what is meter? Meter is nothing but arranging syllables in a sequence using different patterns, and he says that depends upon accent. That is why it is called as accentual verse. And then it is quantitative or chronemic verse. And then use of long, and then it is tonymic. So he says that three types of measures of sequences can be observed in the language of poetry. First is accentual. That is, the name itself is revealing. That is accent. Okay. So verse, accentual verse. So that means what? These lines are made with a repetition of stressed, unstressed syllables in a particular manner. Okay. Say in a line, iambic pentameter. Shakespeare's sonnets are written in iambic pentameter. I have explained what is iambic pentameter. That means 5 unstressed syllables and 5 stressed syllables following in an order, in a line that will be there. They will be there. Okay. So in writing poetry, the poets, of course, will choose one meter. And this meter is nothing but a kind of technical arrangement, okay, based on the accents or stressed or unstressed syllables, etc., or quantitative, which is called as chronemic verse. That is use of long and short vowels. Yesterday, in my lecture, I have described how Jacobson says that the use of long and short vowels actually brings in the emotive function into the speech event. Okay, the or speech acts you can take. Okay, our speech, of course, pronouncing the long and short vowels. The same word actually, Jacobson gave the example of big, and then bake. So this is how he actually has given that example. So in the similar manner, even in the meter also we have the quantitative verse, which is also called as chronemic verse. This is formed using long and short vowels, words with long and short vowels in a particular manner. And then thirdly, he says that there is tonymic verse, where syllable intonations, differences, intonation differences distinguish the word meanings. So the tonymic is actually intonation, tonymic, tone, intonation. As in English, we know we have a pattern called intonation. Of course, even if the foreign speakers cannot use intonation properly, one facility with the English language is that the words will not change meanings, but they may change parts of speech. Okay, so with the stress and with the intonations, etc. So in some languages, the intonation may change the meaning also. So if those words are used in the poetic lines, it is called as tonymic verse. That means a kind of sequence measure of sequence is used in measuring the syllables. Okay, so this is how he says that these three qualities, of course, according to Jacobson, are will allow the linguist to study the linguistic criteria that is present in poetic language in an empirical manner. Further, in this essay, he explains various Russian meters and also Serbian meters, how they, uh, you know, um, create or organize meters using different forms. And then he concludes that, in that part, he concludes that poetic meter has so many intrinsically linguistic particularities. So, poetic meter has many linguistic particularities that it is most convenient to describe it from a purely linguistic point of view. So, after giving us so many examples of different meters in Russian language, Serbian language, and so to some English meters also, he concludes that meter is such a kind of arrangement which could be studied very well in linguistics, because meter is a combination of verbal structures, structures, syllable structures, a certain kind of order that is followed in arranging syllables. Okay, based on tone, based on, as I told you, accentual, based on accent, pronunciation, that is stressed and unstressed, and then based on long and short vowel. This means phonemic, and then tonymic is intonation. This is how he says that poetic language is a matter of study under linguistics. Then further, in the essay, he talks about the value of intonation in English meters, how intonation is having much value in English meters. And he believes that intonational contours are inherent to a poem. Of course, in a poem, intonational colors or contours are very inherent, not only to a poem, but to a poet and a school of poet, which formalism also discusses, he says. So that means what? If we are trying to analyze a school of poetry and to bring the similarities, how the particular school will use a different kind of meter, etc. Of course, the linguistic study helps us to establish that. And then he proceeds to say that the verse design is based on rhythm. So we know rhythm, which is achieved with certain arrangements of syllables, and is also a matter of study for linguistics. So actually, rhythm is also a matter of study, and rhythm, according to him, is not based only on sound pattern, but it is based on semantic uh, um, uh, levels also. So rhythm is based, according to Jacobson, the semantic levels also. And later, after giving few examples of that, he proceeds to say that ambiguity. So this is the most important thing. Ambiguity in language. Of course, in language itself, ambiguity is there. And Jacobson says that in poetry, it is even more there, the ambiguity. This ambiguity is a corollary feature of poetry, a very natural. So, poetry by its nature is ambiguous. That is what he says. Of course, ambiguity is there in language, and when it comes to poetry, of course, he says that is very much present, very naturally present. And he says ambiguity is at the roots of verse, not only the message, but its addresser, addressee, um, uh, you know, um, comes, uh, mm. So not only the message is ambiguous, but who is speaking, who is listening, or who is reading, etc. So if you go to some poetic forms like dramatic monologue, or you have read canonization, so who is the speaker? The I will be used in the poems, but we cannot attribute that I to anyone. Okay, so that kind of ambiguity. An omnipresent third person. In third person narration, you will find an omnipresent third person who is conveying with us everything. but we don't know how, with whom we have to identify, etc. This so Jacobson says that not only in the language, but at the from the side of addresser, addressee, and the message also. Message three factors. These three factors contribute to the ambiguity in poetry. So, and he says that in poetry, the supremacy of poetic function over the referential function increases the ambiguity. So, here to whom the addresser is referring and to what the addresser can refer, or what the message is about, etc. If we take such questions, he says, because in poetry, the poetic function rules high or reigns high, the referential function, becomes the what you say subordinate function, accessory function. So it leads to a kind of ambiguity in poetry. And he further says that in poetry, sound symbolism is also used. Okay. And he says to interpret the ambiguities in poetry, a proper linguistic inquiry of these sounds and corresponding symbols is needed. So, sound symbolism is not only in poetry, it is outside also. So, he says that poetry uses this sound symbolism. One sound stands for something, etc. So, we have to consider how this sound symbolism works. And for that, Jacobson says that linguistics will give you the answer, and we need to explore more from the point of linguistics to understand what sound symbolism is behind any poem, etc. Further, he also says, he refers to two kinds of writings or two styles of writings. He refers to Old Indic and medieval Latin literary theory. He says that distinguishes two poles of verbal art, and that is in Sanskrit, this is Panchali and Vaidarbhi. With this, we have come across in Natya Shastra. I hope you remember this. And then in Latin, ornatus difficilis and ornatus facilities. This is actually difficult ornament and easy ornament. That means, actually, he says that besides the difficult ones, easier things only project more problem, because language is very unattractive and also very transparent in those. And then further he analyzes that poetic language abounds in metaphors and metonymy. But he says that maybe because of the nature of metonymy, the metonymical qualities of poetry are less explored rather than the metaphorical qualities of poetry. See, metonymy is a kind of tool where one term is used to mean another. Say, for example, the ring for the boxing ring, and then pen is mightier than sword. So, pen is for literature, and then sword is for war. So, means to bring change, we need not rely on war alone, but of course, literature also proves an agent of change, a powerful agent of change, and of course, a strong agent of change. So, this is pen is mightier than sword. If we find if some one term is being used to point out or to mean another term, we call this as metonymy. But Jacobson says that maybe due to the difficulties present in analyzing these metonymical qualities of poetry, less work is carried out in this field rather than on the metaphorical side of the poetic language. And also, finally, uh, he gives the example from Shakespeare's Antony and Cleopatra, and using, he says that Shakespeare, by using grammatical categories, makes Antony's speech very powerful and very impressive. And of course, if you, as you have the text on Google also, you can very much very well read and try to understand how, by indirect method and direct method, direct speech, indirect speech, this is the grammatical pattern. By using that, how Antony makes his speech very impressive, and at the time of the death of Caesar, okay, in his burial, and when Brutus killed Caesar, that is how, now you can read. Okay, so after analyzing all these, um, he says that actually, uh, yeah, he says, mm, he refers to 1919, the Moscow Linguistic Circle. They were there, discussing how to define and delimit the range of epitheta ornantia, that is decorative epithets in poetry. Of course, poetic language is very ornamented and very decorative. It's full of figures of speech, of course, symbolism, measure of sequence, selection, combination, whatever that Jacobson has tried to put in the linguistic terms, and we have seen how empirically he says that we can analyze all these poetic patterns through linguistics. That is what he said. And then once in the linguistic circle meeting, they were considering how to decrease this decorative elements. Epithet is an adjective or phrase expressing a quality or attribute regarded as characteristic of the person or thing mentioned. So poetry has certain innate qualities that is being decorated. So how to reduce it then? As a linguist, perhaps they were all linguists together were discussing like that, and then he's saying that one poet, Mazakovsky, um, Whiskies, it's a Russian name. So there, he rebuked them, saying that, by saying that from him any adjective, while in poetry, was thereby a poetic epithet. And now adjectives outside poetry are not epithets, but in any adjective in poetry, when it comes into poetry, of course, is an epithet. And he says, even great in the great Bear, bear, okay, great adjective sometimes turns to be the poetic epithet. And then little in such names of Moscow streets as Bolshaza Presanja and Malaza Presanja, little. So this, he actually, that poet says that there is no need to find out how to delimit the range of epithets, decorative epithets in poetry, because poetry itself is decorative. So there is no, even if you take the common adjectives also, they become epithets in the poetic language. So this is, in other words, to say that it is futile to think of reducing the ornamentation in poetry, because the poetic language itself is having ornamentation and epithets and all. So in other words, poeticalness is not a supplementation of discourse with rhetorical adornment, but a total revaluation of discourse and of all its components whatsoever. So considering the discourse as a general term, he says that poeticalness is not a supplementation of discourse with rhetorical adornment, but a total revaluation of the discourse. So, with poeticalness, the discourse gets totally re-evaluated of all components whatsoever, whatever components are there in a discourse, with what poetical components we have to find out. Here he gives a very interesting instance. A missionary blamed his African flock for walking undressed. So undressed, Africans, native Africans, they maybe because of the heat in the continent or whatever it is, they it's believed that they used to live nakedly. Okay, naked. They always live like that. So one missionary went to Africa, and then he started blaming that you are naked. And what about yourself? They pointed to his visage. Visage is face. When he mentioned like that at them, looking at them, they replied to him, "What about you?" So his visage is face. Are not you too somewhere naked? So they questioned, pointing at his face, "Are not you somewhere naked?" Well, but that is my face. So he was perhaps he didn't expect that kind of um, what you say remark from them, and so he says, "That's my face." Yet in us, retorted the natives, "Everywhere it is face." Oh, everywhere it is face. See how they presented themselves. So in poetry, so taking this example, he says that in poetry, any verbal element is converted into a figure of poetic speech. That is why, what he said, that verbal messages, okay, verbal structures, how verbal structures become a verbal art. So that is with that question he started, and he says that everything is in linguistics, even the verbal art, etc., is also in linguistics. That is what he says. In poetry, any verbal structure that is being used in our day-to-day language or in other sciences, whatever purposes it is being used, when you bring it to poetry, that is what Jakobson is telling, it is converted into a figure of poetic speech. So it is very much converted into a poetic speech. So we cannot what's a limit that this is poetic language and that is not, etc. So language is language. Language is actually verbal structures arranged in a different pattern. So of course poetic language is also having or comprising verbal structures only. So all verbal structures, of course, when they are used in poetry, will turn to be some kind of the figure of poetic speech or figures of speech. That is what we say. So here, finally, he says in the concluding paragraph, he says, "My attempt to vindicate the right and duty of linguistics to direct the investigation of verbal art in all its compass and extent can come to a conclusion with the same burden which summarized my report to the 19 year at Indiana University." That means he uses one word. So how my attempt to present that linguistics, poetics is an integral part of linguistics. I want to conclude with my previous speech that is given in 1953, wherein he says that if linguistica sum linguistici nihil me alienum puto. So that is I am a linguist. I consider nothing linguistic alien to me. So I am a linguist and I consider nothing linguistic alien to me. So this is actually an adaptation from the famous quote of Roman playwright Terence. I am human and I consider nothing human alien to me. So he took it from the Roman playwright who said that I am human and I consider nothing human alien to me. So in the similar manner, if you want to tell me how poetics is connected with linguistics, he says that because I am a linguist and in poetry also there are linguistic elements, that is language, etc. I consider that it is not an alien thing, it is not a new thing, it is also a part of linguistics only. If the poet Ransom is right, and he is right, that poetry is a kind of language, the linguistic whose field is any kind of language may and must include poetry in his study. Of course, poetry is a kind of language, and because linguists study language, they have to include the language of poetry also in it as a subject. And further, he says that. Um, there is some criticism where people are thinking that linguistics is deaf to poetry, etc. And that is why he says that he wants to affirm that linguist is not deaf to the poetic function of language, and a literary scholar indifferent to linguistic problems and unconversant with linguistic methods are equally flagrant anachronisms. And a literary scholar should also know linguistics to a certain extent. So, linguists should accept that poetry is their what you call their area of study. Poetry is also their area of study because it is also language. What is there in poetry? It is language only. Language having certain features. With certain features, the language is being used, are being made poetical. So, a linguist should study. And likewise, a literary scholar or a literary critic, according to Jacobson, should he says that no, all these what linguistics is. So see how he has given different points to bring out empiricism to the what do you call um, literary criteria that is present in poetic language. So this is how in Roman Jacobson's essay, Linguistics and Poetics, we will find a new angle that linguistics and poetics are not two separate, different, distinct fields which have no relation at all, but they are very much interdependent. So that is why he says, the language outside poetry also has poetic function. And of course, when language is being used in poetry, of course, it will have even more of the poetic function. That means to say that, as he stated in the very beginning, that though we have six functions of language or six factors of language, all of them will not be present in a single verbal message. So, this is when coming to the poetic language, the poetic function of language will be the predominant one or significant one, whereas all other functions of language, that he gave six functions of language, and out of this, if when we come to poetry, the poetic function reigns high, and the five functions, the five rest functions will be functioning, of course, in a accessory manner or subordinate manner. So this is how he tries to make poetics a part of linguistics, and how the knowledge of linguistics, okay, that is syllables, gradation, okay, meter, sequences, etc., helps us to understand poetry or even literature, for instance, because he took the examples of Shakespeare's dramas also, and of course here and there prose writings also. So their poetics is of course synonymous with literature for us. It is not only poetry, though he refers to poetical features like meter, okay, rhythm, rhyme, or sound symbolism, etc. All these can be of course seen in other genres, other forms of literature also, not only in poetry, though to a certain lesser extent than we find them in poetry. Okay, with this I have finished this essay, Jacobson's linguistics and poetics, and of course you will have only one question, that is how Jacobson presents or convincingly argues that poetics is a part of linguistics. How? Otherwise, you may ask what is the empirical evidences or empirical criteria, linguistic criteria that poetry includes as according to Jacobson, that may be asked. So with this, I take leave. I hope you are all listening. And if you have any doubts, you please try to communicate with me. Okay. Have a nice time.